Hello everyone, in this tutorial I'll show you how to create this monthly habit tracker in Excel. You can choose any month and year, the dates update automatically, and the tracker stops at the correct final day of the month. It also calculates your consistency for each habit, each day, and the average for the entire month. Every time we pick a new month, we can use this red color formatting to kind of tell us that we've forgotten to delete some of the values. And every time we pick a new longer month after that, the checkboxes will be back added. We can also just insert a new row and it automatically inserts our checkboxes. So we can use this if we need more habits than that. So the only issue is that if you are using the newest version of Excel, like I do, you will notice that here under Insert, we have those checkboxes. However, in older Excel versions, this will not be available to you. So what I would suggest is to use these drop-downs with checkboxes. For that, you will just need to select the whole field and then go to Data, Data Validation, and then just insert like something like a checkbox or any other symbol that you like and use this way. You'll be able to use exact same formulas. The only difference would be that you would need to use your symbol instead of true. I will tell you a bit more about it later. So if you have an older Excel, unfortunately, it will not look the same, but you can still follow this tutorial. Now let's start with this empty Excel worksheet. We will just add the green background color and add this buffer column A with the column width 1. After that, I'll just merge the B, C, 2, 3, 4 rows. So this will be my title. I can just type in monthly habit tracker. And I will also make it bold, white font color, and this green background color. Now we can merge the 6th and 7th row and do the same in both B and C. This will be our titles for the log table. So the first one would be just our habit. And the second one is how consistent we are with that. I don't think it is recommended to track more than like 10 habits, but we do have space for, let's say, 25. This is why I will be just adding white background color to the 25 rows after that. And we also know that every month has at max 31 days. This is why I'm now highlighting 31 columns. And I want to make them column width 4. We don't need more than that to just have a checkbox, right? And like this, everything fits into one screen. Now we can maybe make column width 25 or even 30 for the habits. Let's also make the title bigger. Rows 6 and 7 will be my headers. So as usual, I make them this green color and white font. I will also make the days bold. So the 7th one. And now we can also add the white background color to the rest of the rows. And let's add some borders. Next step would be to add those check marks. So I just highlight the whole field. And then if you're using the newer Excel, you can just go to Insert and then pick the checkbox. And this is it. However, if you're using the older Excel, you basically do the exact same thing. You highlight it, and then you would need to go to Data, Data Validation, and then pick List, and here you'll be able to enter any symbols that you like. So I will just recommend to use the checkbox, and I will change the font color to this same green color just to have the same color scheme. However, maybe if you're using the checkboxes, you can also make the font a bit larger, maybe 14, not 11. We also want to add our months and years. So for that, I will merge the 5 columns to add months with a title and make the background color for the title green, and for the months that we're gonna pick white. This is really up to you how you format this. You don't need to follow every single step. I also like to add the borders, obviously, in the same color. Now we can just copy paste it and use exact same formatting for our year. Let's make it bold, and we will make the titles have a white font color, and for the values we'll have them have a green font color. So for the year, it's quite easy. We can just type in any year. And for the months, I will be using a drop down with month names. But for now, we'll just type in January. And for the first formula, we will just need the date formula. We can just click our year. And for the months, because we're using the names, we would need this months and then $1 and the cell where we have the name, and add 1 for the day. However, this will not work if your Excel language isn't English, if your computer language isn't English, because Excel will just not recognize January as a date, right? Because if you're, for example, German, like January isn't a month in German. So you would need to use either your local names for months, or you can use numbers. So if you were to just use 6, for example, you can just delete the whole month one and the cell and just use the cell instead. Obviously, the numbers don't look as good and maybe a bit less practical. However, this version, this formula will work in every single language independently of your Excel or of your computer, of your local settings, whatever. This will work everywhere. So if you don't really need the names, or if your formula isn't working, just use the numbers. I will, however, be using data validation, and then list, and then you would need to copy paste or type in month names, comma, separated. This way you'll have a drop down with months names, and we can test it now. So if I were to pick June, you see we have our 1st of June. If I were to pick August, we see the formula updates and we have 1st of August. Let's type 2027, and now we have 1st of August 2027. And for the row before, we'll just equal it to the same cell, D7. Now we need a formula for the next day. So it is obviously quite easy to just say, hey, it's the day before plus 1. However, for February 28th, you will still then see 1st of March after. So if you want for Excel to stop automatically, we would need to use a bit more complicated formula. So at first we check if the cell before that is empty or not. And if it's empty, we want our value also to be empty. And if it's not, we want to check if the next day after the cell before is larger than the months that we had. So this will return false if that D7 plus 1 is basically in the next month. That's why I want to see empty value if that's the case, and if it isn't, I just want to see the next day. For the first row, we now can just extend the formula because it's basically just the cell underneath. And for the row D7, we need to extend our second formula, not the first one, right? And now we'll just have basically days that we can't see, because every time you see those symbols, it's just that your column is too short to visualize the value. What we will do, we would format it. So for the row number 7, we just want to see the day. So we can go to custom, delete general, and just type in D. And for the row above, we actually want to see weekdays. So we'll go to the formatting, again, more number formats, custom, general, and then DDD. However, again, if your Excel isn't in English or your local settings are not in English, this might not work. Because, for example, in German, we use T and not D, right? Because days, Tage. So if you're using different language elsewhere, check your local formatting before, because this might not work. And now let's just check if everything works correctly. Yes, we can see with February, the 3 days are lost. September, 30 days, so everything correct. This means I can now resize my column to 4 again and maybe center everything. I will just add 2 boxes for my overall habits count and my overall consistency, which will be an average of our habits consistencies. I will just make them in this green color with white font that you can separate them from months and year a bit better visually. But again, you don't really need to follow the same formatting that I do. You can pick any color that you want. This is just what I do. But the next step would be to add our daily consistency. So for that, what we want to do is to count how many checkboxes we had for the day divided by the number of habits that we have. For that, we use if D7 is empty, then empty, because for the columns that will not have any days, we also do not want to see any zeros, right? And then we will use count ifs and then count the whole column. You can just select it and count the true values, because for Excel, if the checkbox is checked, it's basically true. However, keep in mind, if you're using older Excel, what you would type here instead of true is your check mark inside of those quotation marks like this. And it will do exactly the same. But I will be using true. And I also need to divide it by the number of habits that we have. So I actually will have this in my O3 cell, because this is where I will insert my count of habits formula. So I can just use this cell. And maybe let's make it a little smaller and also green font color. And let's make it percentage. Now we can add this habits tracked formula. I will be just using count A and then selecting the whole table. This formula just adds all non-empty values. So right now it's 0. If I were to just enter A, which is an example, my habit A, you see we now have habits tracked 1 and we have 0%. Filled. However, let's also add if error to this, because as you can see, we couldn't see anything before that. It's just because we basically divide by 0, which is not good. And with if error, then empty, we can cover this. So every time our tracker is empty, we will just see an empty cell here too. Now we can extend the formula. And if I were to delete my habit A, you see now we don't see any errors, everything is empty too. If I were to add, let's say AB, and then let's just click some of those checkboxes, you can see that the percentages update. For our habits consistency, we will just use our if formula again. First thing that we'll check is if our habit name is entered or not, because we do not want to see those 0% for the habits that we're not tracking, right? And otherwise, we will be counting the checked checkboxes. So for me, I can just highlight the whole row and type in true. However, remember, if you're using older Excel instead of true, just insert this checkbox inside of quotation marks and it will work the same way. So for me, it's true. And I also want to count only if we have the day for it, right? Because I do not want to count 31 checkboxes inside of September, right? We only have 30 days. So we do have to take into account if this month had 30 days, 31, 29, because otherwise this consistency percentage won't be fair, right? We can't just divide by 31. That's why we'll be counting the values that in this case greater than 0 is because we do have formulas inside. So if I were to just say it's not empty, yes, it is kind of visually empty, but the cell itself isn't empty. That's why it's just use this greater than 0 formula. It's safer. And then we can just divide by the amount of days again. Do not forget to set, all right, to add the dollar signs for the days, because otherwise we will not be able to extend this formula cleanly. Okay, and now we can just extend it, and as you can see, it updates for the habit B, and it's also obviously updates for all the other rows, but we can't see them, and this is actually what we wanted. Let's format them as percentage, maybe add 1 decimal sign. And if I were now to choose, let's say August, it has 31 days. We see that the percentages change, right? Because we divide 2 by 31 now, and before that 2 by 30, and now 2 by 28. So everything works as we expected. Let's now add some color formatting. And what I would do is color formatting new rule, and then I just want to use the 3 scale formula. However, you can do like bar charts, filament, it's if you like it more, or anything else. And what I would do is I would set number 0 is minimum, then medium is 50, and for maximum you can either select 1. However, I normally do 0.9, 0.95, because I just do want to see the scale greener before I hit those 100%. And also technically it's impossible for you to hit more than 100% here, right? This is just how the template is built. So in this case, I will do 0.95, and it will be kind of greener as near to 95%. So let's just check that you can visually see that when I come near to 50%, that the scale kind of gets yellower, yellower, and yellower. The next formula that we need is our overall consistency. We can just straight up use average. However, it will lead to the same problem. If the table is empty, you have an average of empty, and it gives you back an error. So we just use if error, then average over our column, and we can also format it percentage, add 1 decimal. We technically can leave it as it is. However, if you don't want to see empty columns, you can add this color formatting. This is actually quite simple. So you highlight the 3 extra columns, because this is the max that you can have, right? You can't have less than 28 days and more than 31. So just those 3 columns. And what we will be checking is if our AF7, and we do have to insert $sign before 7, because this is the only column, this is the only row that we need. If it is empty, then we obviously want the column to not be visual. For that, we would need to set our borders to green, our fill to green, our font to green, like basically everything this light green that is my background color. And you can see everything just disappears. It's obviously still there, it's just colored in this light green color. So if I go back to January, you see, oh, the columns are back here. And now let's go back to February, and yeah, they disappear. Next step is again up to you. So sometimes we will be reusing this tracker, and some people have an empty tracker already, and some people just delete everything from this month and reuse it. And you would kind of need to delete the data for the previous months. And if you miss it, you kind of have those checked boxes, even though the column isn't there anymore. So the easiest way to do it would be just to use this AND formula and check, okay, if the day is empty. However, the box is clicked. So in this case, it would be AF7 is empty. And the checkbox, so the cell there where I'm at, which is AF8, if it is true, then it is an error, right? Because it can't be true because the date doesn't exist. If you're using checkbox, use the checkbox inside of the quotation marks instead of true. Will work the same. And I will just add this red font color. And if I were to pick a month like February, for example, you can see that I have this red checkbox, even though like they will not be counted, but visually it's also not great. So it kind of reminds us to delete them. And the last optional formatting is to highlight the today's date. For that, we just highlight the 6th and 7th row. And we'll just check if the day, so D6, is today or not. So I will highlight it the other way around. So it was green with white font color. So I will make it white with green font color. However, you can maybe use red or anything that's more up to your liking. So right now it's July, not September. So if I were to pick July, you will see that I'm filming it on Tuesday, the 21st of July. And yeah, this is it. This is the whole tracker. It is quite simple, right? We only have our days that kind of update accordingly to our months. We have our consistency for each habit for each day. We have the count of our habits, and we have our overall consistency. There are a lot of trackers on the internet, both on YouTube or on Etsy, that have way more features than that. However, sometimes we are just suffocated by all the features. It can be quite intimidating. So if you just want to start with your habit tracker, maybe having something more simple will work better for you. And also you can just use it as a starting point, and you can add only the features that you need to it. However, if you have some specific features in mind that you think would work well with this tracker, just let me know down below, and I might make an updated version of it in the future. Or in general, if you have other ideas for my new tutorials, just let me know down below. And other than that, have a great day. Goodbye.